I think one of the disappointing things is it appears that some of the states aren't learning from some of the things that have happened in the other states. With respect to, it appears that people don't always tell the truth when they're speaking with contract tracers. It's always worthwhile probably getting a secondary confirmation with respect to where people are working, etc. But look, it is a great relief that these restrictions have now been lifted, earlier than what they talked about. But to think you'd go to a full slam down, forcing everyone to stay at home, all these businesses to close, it's very concerning.
Yeah, people are calling it martial law, pepperoni gate. The investigation, just looking at that in isolation, how does that escape? How does that escape that the guy actually worked in the joint?
Yeah, well, look, it's you would have thought, Tim, that we're sort of 8 or 9 months into this whole thing now, and we've seen human beings make mistakes. That's okay, and we've seen certain mistakes made several months ago in other states. But you'd think if someone's working in any respect in one of these quarantine hotels, that you'd have the full information on, where they work, their visa status, all of those things at the beginning. And if in fact they had another job somewhere else, you might say, well, look, why don't we pay you more money just to be dedicated working, to be totally focused on working in this hotel? Yet we've had, instances of this taking place in Victoria where people worked in quarantine hotels. They went home, they worked in other hotels, they worked as security guards, and a friend who works in aged care would get it, then they'd work in another aged care centre. There are lessons to be learned from several months ago, and it's just very disappointing that when you sort of think about, well, did you know any of that information? And was the first response having to go immediately to this full lockdown? We look at New South Wales, there's a lot to be learned there. Like, okay, you've got a hot spot, let's zero in on that hot spot, put some restrictions around that and get on top of it. But we can't go forward where, basically the only tool is a full lockdown.
Bill, on a bigger note, do you think we need to change the Constitution and just have local members and a federal system as opposed to premiers, not only what we're seeing with the South Australia lockdown, but the borders, with the bushfires and so forth?
Look, it's, there's only 25 million people living in this very large island continent. And if we go back to when the Federation were put together and the fathers of the Australian Federation, back in those days, if you weren't walking to get somewhere, you were lucky enough to be on the back of a buggy, with a horse pulling you. So that thing was designed all those years ago. Think about the modern technology, all the breakthroughs that science has brought us. Now, if you sat down with a clean sheet of paper and said, what would be the most effective way for all this to work? I think you'd come up and say, look, we want a national government and then very responsive, well-resourced local governments. What do we really, what really gets added in the middle? The only great loss would be if we got rid of the states, would be how exciting it is watching Origin matches if you're from New South Wales or Queensland.
Oh, yeah, don't bring it up, Bill. Don't mention the war. Yeah, and look, the other thing, look, we're going to be done by time, but, small business, plenty of small business on life support. This is the last thing they need, this kind of sort of stuttering.
Look, that's right, Tim. And what we should also see, every government should be coming out and saying, OK, look, we're going to close you down for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. You're going to be fully compensated. So you don't need to have that extra worry about how you're going to pay your rent, your insurance policies and things. But you never get to hear anything from any of these state premiers with respect to, the compensation, or that you can not, rest assured, don't be worried about that. We'll intervene with your landlords, etc. You can have some peace of mind about that. It's always about the COVID. Always about, 22 people in South Australia, Tim, is what we're talking about.
Bill, in your opinion, what consequences do you think need to be taken for people providing false information?
Well, look, at the end of the day, if we have laws and we have regulations, they should be enforced. Now, if in fact there weren't any in place, they need to be put in place. But think about the cost to the community. It's not just the people that live in South Australia, people that had plans to go across to South Australia for Christmas. All of those sorts of things are all thrown into disarray. The fear continues to be increased. I think the consequences need to be quite serious so that people understand if you don't do the right thing and it has major costs for society, you're going to have to bear a cost.
What's your general message in closing, Bill, to fellow Australians about getting involved, patronising small business in the sense of spending money with small businesses? We're coming up to Christmas time. It's vital, isn't it?
Look, absolutely. We've got about 7 million plus households in the country, Tim. Just imagine if everyone spends an extra $100 a week with their local small businesses. Between now and Christmas, that's $3.5 billion. But make sure everything on the table at Christmas time is from Australian manufacturers. Go to the local businesses. The big businesses can look after themselves, but it's those local ones. If you've got to pay a little bit more, pay a little bit more. We need these people staying in business. We have a long way to go, Tim.
Well said. Bill Lang, Executive Director of Small Business Australia. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jane. Bye, Jim.